Welcome to Focus 54, your real feel of African news. My name is Jeffrey Mrimbechi, and every single week we have something different for you because all 54 countries in Africa are active. Africa is moving, Africa is changing, and Africa is moving forward. Now, today we are focusing on the theme of the recently held third ordinary session of the 6th Pan-African Parliament, which emphasizes on education. Educating in Africa fit for the 21st century, and the primacy was placed on decolonization of Africa's education in the 21st century by a call for a robust implementation of STEM education in African countries. Now, we will take this lightly, and don't take my words tongue-in-cheek as I talk about education. I know you're thinking about your school, you're thinking about your educational system from your ECD to your primary school education, all the way until you get your PhD. But have you actually thought about where this education came from? 200 years ago, 3 centuries ago, what was our education system like? How are we so sustainable and so rich and flourishing? When did this change? And how did we become what they call a third world continent when we were the first to come up with a lot of things? Did you know that the first library in the world was in Africa? A lot of firsts came from Africa. Now we've got an expert who's becoming in studio, Clive Chiridza, who is an expert on international relations and a whole lot more. And he'll help us decipher and find out and help us really think and interrogate the way we have been doing things as Africans, as individuals, at home. Are we doing the right thing for Africa? And where will our future generations be? But this will not be Focus 54 without us going deeper and looking at headlines across the continent. And there's quite a lot that is going on. We did say that in the beginning of this year that this is the election year of Africa, with most of the countries within this lovely continent having elections this year. And we touched down in East Africa, where Rwanda's presidential candidates kick off with Kagame facing familiar rivals. And the campaign for Rwanda's July 15 presidential election began on Saturday with 9 million registered voters. And the election is coupled with legislative elections for the first time. Paul Kagame, for first elected president by parliament in the year 2000 and re-elected by universal suffrage in 2003, 2010 and 2017, with over 90% of the vote each time, will face familiar rivals Frank Habineza and Felipe Mpiamana, and his 2017 opponent. And this will be a key election, and seems like the build-up towards this has shown that at least 90%, if not 95% of the population is backing the already existing president, Paul Kagame, and will be following that. Now, key opposition figures such as Victoria Ingobire and Bernard Ntagama are barred from running due to past convictions, and they have a very strict law against that. Now, this is expected to run for 3 weeks until the 15th of July, where the general elections will be carried out, and we'll be having a look at that. Now, closer to Zimbabwe, we move to Zambia, right across the border. Zambia having had some really tough times now. The drought, the El Nino-induced drought, has not spared Zambia, with the drought which is expected to halve the maize output in that country, thereby creating poor supply for local regional markets. And the whole SADC region is facing this El Nino-induced drought. Now, this means that when maize output is halved, that has a very direct impact on the residents of Zambia and SADC. And this will be one of the topical issues under the banner of climate change, food security and sustainability as Zimbabwe will be hosting the SADC bloc in August right here in Harare. Now we turn to Uganda, still in East Africa. Uganda's exports to Rwanda have hit a record high in the year 2023, signifying the country's consistency and resilience against negative regional and global market forces. Now, the border between the two countries is now a hive of activity, with what is recorded as some of the highest movement of goods and services between the two borders, and it has created a macro and a micro economy that is between the two countries. And we'll be following those and more stories. You can find those out on our Facebook page and our website, www.zbcnews.co.zw. Now, the big topical one is still in East Africa, which is the hub of news that is in Kenya, where the President William Ruto backs down on the tax rises after much consideration. A much debated tax bill which was proposed was rejected, and the President and his government have reconsidered and said they will not sign this bill and will reconsider other reforms other than the proposed bill, which was facing quite a lot of debate within their parliament and within their citizenry. Back in Zimbabwe, we have the African Leaders Investment Summit. Now, Zimbabwe's vast opportunities continue to attract the attention of investors, with the African trade investment leaders in the country to scout for investment leads. Now, we are talking about a country such as Zimbabwe, which is oddly, and no one can explain how such a small country such as Zimbabwe has all the minerals on the periodic table, and beneficiation, looking at other markets and looking at value chains and extracting value from each proponent of the African value chain is top of the agenda. That is what's happening at this summit, and that is the African consciousness that is spreading across the continent. Stay tuned for more. Our guest is now in studio, and we'll be talking about education as the new renaissance for Africa in the 21st century. Welcome back to Focus 54, and as I had promised you, that in the second segment we have an expert in the studio who is an expert on international relations, and I always like to poke him and find out what the law means and have a clear understanding of what we're talking about. And we have Clive Chiridza, who is in studio. Clive, welcome back to Focus 54. This time some interesting times with the Pan-African Parliament having its sixth session. Welcome back to Focus 54.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now we have something very interesting. The big question, why was education made the principal theme for this session in 2024?
Now, it's always imperative for us to understand that education is a key component in human civilization. Henceforth, proof to this is the way in which it shapes individuals and even societies. It would be naive for us to sit here and limit our understanding of education only to a tool or a neutral vehicle for transmission of knowledge and information, but rather we have to broaden our spectrum and perspective of education to considering it as a political tool. If you check throughout history, education has always been linked to power and authority. Getting into the philosophies of Joshua Maponga, one of the African brethren, he talks about the three important estates that are linked to the humanity, land, and survival.
I believe he also talked about indigenous-based education.
Very, very true. On this one, he was saying there are three important estates that we need to take cognizance of. He talks of an estate that resides or is rested in between our two ears. This speaks to the head. Mm-hmm. He says it's important to guard our mental software. You need to take charge of your mentality. Secondly, after you've mastered this first estate, he talks about going on to the next level, the middle ground battle, he calls it. which is in between your legs. I'm speaking about posterity and continuity. What seeds are you planting, or what seeds are being planted in you? Only after you've got control over this estate, then finally we move on to the third level estate, which is just beneath our feet. And this speaks to the land, the continent, the mass itself.
And the ultimate connection with that.
With that, exactly. And so he says it's actually senseless for us to entrust anyone with the land, and yet they have not yet taken mastery and stamina over their mental stature, fabric, and status. He says doing so, we risk to vandalize the continent at large. And therefore, this move and bid by the Pan-African Parliament speaks to decolonization of education. And to that effect, it means redressing colonial legacies.
What are some of these challenges that have necessitated this decolonization? You've clearly explained how education can be weaponized. It's how powerful it is. What then brought about to say, as Africans, we need to change these education systems that we have and have a renaissance, a rebirth of knowledge?
Okay. A myriad of challenges which range from ancient history up to the contemporary age. Talk of the repercussions of 400 years of African slave trade. You talk of the 1835 British Parliament motion by Lord Macaulay to try and dislodge our African education system so that we can become a true dominated nation to them. Talk of colonization itself and its legacies. You speak about the imperial spin-offs coming to the contemporary age. I remember the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, complaining, bringing out an outcry over the little returns we get as Africa after exporting raw coffee to the first world countries. In 2020, this was in between the heat of the COVID pandemic, where we had French scientists and doctors actually proclaiming that there is a need for the world to test vaccines, and they actually pointed out Africa as a place and laboratory to do such tests. Go back to 2019, I remember the Nigerian Minister of Agriculture, the Honorable Ogbe, also bringing out an outcry as to the way to which Nigerians were importing the pizza from London through their mobile phones. This speaks to our uncontrolled exotic tastes.
So in this 21st century, where we have access to internet, we literally are in a global village. The issue of STEM, education and its sustainability, how can we then turn around all of these things that you've spoken about in this modern day time, and how can we all move together as an African continent?
First and foremost, it's always important for us to understand the acronym STEM. STEM speaks to science aspects, and science is simply systematic and evidence, the best approach to understand the natural world. Technology speaks to the borrowing of scientific approaches to solve practical problems. Engineering speaks about the consolidation of the two so as to come up with designs of machines
and solutions,
processes, machines and devices. And then mathematics is simply a framework, a model of analysis, quantifying and even optimizing solutions. And then to that effect, it means then that the synergy of all these four components speaks to the truest sense of economic development and power of Africa as a continent. This then implies that after implementation of STEM, we are supposed to have a people who understand the laws of nature, a people who have got the capacity to extract raw materials and even turn them to usable tools, as well as organizing work and then benefiting, yielding dividends in terms of human securities.
Wow. Clive, you have given me a lot to digest, and as a result, we need to take a break. But in summation, in what I would say in my layman's view and understanding, is that education is something we should never underrate. It is more powerful and more profound, and shapes past, present, and futures. And the implementation of STEM in our African lives and our education systems is something that is imperative and was discussed at the Pan-African Parliament in the 6th session. We take a short break, and when we come back, we interrogate further this issue of education and how we as an African continent will be going forward from now on. Stay tuned for more. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the third and final segment of Focus 54. And if you're just joining us, we are discussing the very topical issue that was discussed in the 6th session of the African, the 6th ordinary session of the Pan-African Parliament, which was emphasizing on education. And in studio, we have Clive Chiradza, who is our expert today, helping us understand. He took us from what education means, why we what brought about the necessitation of this renaissance, what STEM really means to us as Africans, and where we're going. Now, Clive, back in studio, we are talking about the potential political, cultural, and socio-economic benefits of decolonization. I'll give an example of two nations that I've seen in the last 5 or so, in fact, the last 10 or 20 years. You talk of Rwanda under Paul Kagame. You talk about Burkina Faso under the new president, Ibrahim Traoré. They had a complete changeover of their educational system from the Francophone, the French system, to a new one, and they're implementing new things. It comes with a resistance, politically, culturally, and socio-economically. What are the benefits of actually going through that tough process of decolonization of your education system?
Many benefits are actually attached to indigenization of education systems. You talk of patriotism. It actually unifies the people. It brings social cohesion. You talk about national pride. It is also an aspect that is reinforced when we actually own our own education system. You can make mention of an enhancement in economic variables and indices. You talk of an increase in Human Development Index, as well as an increase in human securities, like I had said earlier on. And you can even also talk about the quality of the critical mass or the population. An owned indigenous education system makes sure that it provides an enlightened citizenry, one who are aware even of their own civil, democratic, human, and even fundamental rights. So it's quite important. And also out of this, we also even expect strategic thought to be birthed, as well as an enhanced willpower, which is guided by direction, discipline, dedication. And furthermore, you can even talk about technological advancement in as much as military capabilities are concerned. So in a nutshell, all we can say is the STEM education in Africa answers the political, the economic, the social, the technological, the legal, the health, environmental, and even the medical question of Africa.
I agree with you totally. For those that have been following Focus 54 and all of our news bulletins, I know for a fact there is research on getting mosquitoes to prevent malaria,
Okay.
and this is research being conducted in Africa.
Very true.
We have countries such as Rwanda that manufacture their own cell phones. Some are manufacturing their own cars. That is I'll say from the 54 countries.
Mhm.
These are the positive stories that are coming out. But Africa has had its problems, financially, resource-wise, and churning out resources to benefit us. What are some of the barriers of entry for us as a continent to move forward? We know the resources are down there. They are within the people. And we're a continent, as a continent, we have the highest demography of young people. But what are the barriers? Is it poverty? Is it wars? What are the barriers of entry for us to have this complete revolution?
Just like you've just mentioned, poverty, wars, conflict, financial and even natural resource constraints. You talk of the lack of curriculum that is focused to problem solving and critical thinking. You can even talk about the lack of the adequate human capital to foster this initiative.
Are foreign adversaries a potential barrier? Obviously, like you said, we're decolonizing our education system. Some former masters still believe that they can lay claim to this African land. Do they not also come through as a barrier?
They definitely can. What we need to understand, Jeff, is that human beings are only a tabula rasa at birth. But after they have experiences, teachings, writing over their minds, they tend to acquire some perspectives which guide the way in which they conduct other human beings. Naturally, going by the realism theory, we say human beings are just selfish and aggressive. And so it's expected for our former colonizers to be aggrieved by this initiative. Why? Because it's an offshoot to their own interests.
Now, in a closing summary of everything you've said that human beings are a result of an epiphany of the experiences that they meet along the way.
Yes.
Is there any hope for Africa?
I'll give an example of China. Just a few decades ago, it was a poverty-stricken nation, state, and country. But at some point, they decided to take up the STEM revolution. And it's only now when we hear the Chinese Communist Party lawyer, then diplomat Victor Gao, coming up in the open and proclaiming that China is fast becoming a captain of global industry, economics, and technology, even a magnet of wealth internationally. Let me say, in his book, The Church and Political Responsibility, one of our African elders, Archbishop Ezekiel Guti, decreed that there was hope for Africa. Also in his teachings and seminars, Prophet Emmanuel Makandiwa said there is great potential in Africa. This was in his seminar entitled The Black Man. We have leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, who had a vision for a prosperous and informed Africa. They also had hope in Africa. Captain Thomas Sankara, Julius Nyerere, Robert Mugabe, Muammar Gaddafi.
If you had not mentioned Thomas Sankara, I would have added that name.
Yeah, all died in this hope. And for me to be sitting here as a progenitor of my patriarchs, what else would I say? Yes, there is hope for Africa. Not only is there hope for Africa, but a reality of a first world Africa that lies ahead of us.
Wow, that is a profound way to end this, and I hope that our viewers will also be able to go out and also research on the books that you've spoken about and the leaders that we constantly talk about If you were not around when Thomas Sankara was alive, you should research on Ibrahim Traore. He seems to be the golden boy and the reincarnation of those Pan-African principles, and he's doing some sterling work in Burkina Faso that is really changing the lives of the people there. Clive Chiridza, who is our guest in studio, thank you so much for joining us and for enlightening us on education. In fact, you brought in more education within this short while than I thought I would be able to process over months on end, and I hope that people will be able to follow you and get to see some of your posts online. Sadly, this is where we have to cap off Focus 54, and you can join us and also look at most of, in fact, all of our episodes, previous ones and future ones that will be coming up, especially on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, that is ZBC Entertainment and ZBC News Online, on YouTube as well as Facebook. For Focus 54, my name is Jeffrey Murimbechi.